The kind of silence that fills a five-star dining room isn't peaceful. It's engineered. Every sound is calculated, the low murmur of conversation designed not to carry, the clink of crystal that signals wealth without announcing it, the soft percussion of a server's shoes on marble floors tuned so guests never feel interrupted. Mira Delacroix had spent 4 years learning to move through that silence like water through stone, unseen, unfelt, gone before anyone thought to look. She was 29 years old, and she had made an art form of disappearing. The restaurant was called Alouette, French for lark, the bird that sings before dawn, which Mira always thought was a strange choice for a place that operated exclusively at night. It occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, and on a clear evening, you could see the lights of the city stretching all the way to the lake. The guests never bothered looking. When you could afford a table at Alouette, the view was just another thing you took for granted. Mira had taken nothing for granted in her life. She had grown up in Scarborough with a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still came home, smelling like industrial cleaner and optimism. She had put herself through Ryerson on loans and part-time work, graduated with a degree in accounting that she had never quite managed to convert into an office job that wanted her. Every firm she interviewed at had looked at her resume, looked at her, and found some polite way to say she wasn't quite what they were looking for. She knew what they were looking for. She didn't look like it. So she had taken the job at Alouette 4 years ago, because it paid better than anything else she'd been offered, because the tips from a clientele that included Bay Street executives and foreign dignitaries extraordinary, and because the head sommelier, a woman named Françoise, had looked at Mira's application and said, "But so am I. You're overqualified for this, but so am I. And this place pays better than the Symphony," and hired her on the spot. She had never quite left. There was something useful, she had discovered, about being invisible in a room full of powerful people. They talked in front of her as though she were furniture, as though her presence required no adjustment, no modulation of what they said or how they said it. She heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. She saw things she wasn't supposed to see, and she catalogued all of it in the very precise and orderly filing system of her mind, the same way she catalogued numbers, the same way she understood that every set of figures told a story if you knew how to read it. Mira knew how to read things. She had known, for instance, that the private equity firm, whose partners came in every Thursday, was running a side structure that didn't appear in their public filings. She had worked that out from 3 separate conversations over 6 weeks, none of which had been directed at her. She had known that the senator, who came in with his wife on anniversary dinners, also came in with someone else on Tuesdays. She had known that the man who tipped $100 on a $40 drink and called her sweetheart without making eye contact was afraid of something, because generous tippers who couldn't look at the person they were tipping were always afraid of something. She kept all of it to herself. That was the other thing about invisibility. It only worked if you were scrupulously, absolutely discreet. The night that changed everything began like every other night at Alouette. Mira arrived at 5:30, changed into her uniform in the staff room at the back, the black dress that management had chosen for its elegance and that Mira had quietly taken in and altered herself, because she was not going to spend 8 hours in something that didn't fit her properly, and went to check the evening's reservations. Table 14 had been booked under the name Harrow. She didn't recognize it. But the notation beside it, maximum privacy, no approach without signal, cleared by management. She recognized that. It meant someone important was coming. Someone who paid for the privilege of being undisturbed. Françoise appeared at her elbow as she was reviewing the layout. "Table 14 is yours tonight," the older woman said quietly. "Management wants their most experienced server. You don't speak unless spoken to. You read the table and you anticipate. If they need anything, you appear. If they don't, you don't exist. I'm good at not existing, Mira said. Françoise gave her a look that was almost fond. Yes, she said, you are. He arrived at 8:15. Mira knew who he was before she knew his name. The way you sometimes know a storm is coming before you can see the clouds. There was a quality to the way the room adjusted around him. Not dramatically, not obviously, but the ambient temperature of the space shifted slightly, the way it does when something genuinely dangerous enters it. The maitre d' moved differently. The other servers found reasons to be somewhere else. Even the low murmur of conversation at nearby tables dropped by a fraction of a decibel, though none of the diners could have explained why. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that had been made specifically for his body by someone who charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. His hair was dark, starting to grey at the temples in a way that looked deliberate. His face was the kind of face that had been handsome once, and was now something past handsome, harder, more defined, carrying the weight of too many decisions made in rooms where the wrong choice got people hurt. He sat down at table 14 with the ease of a man who had never in his life needed to be invited to sit. 2 other men settled at a table nearby, not with him, but positioned security, she understood, without having to be told. His name, Mira learned later that evening, was Stellan Vard. She did not know that name, but she learned it the way she learned everything, by listening to what the room did not say directly, but communicated in 100 other ways. The maitre had used it once, quietly, standing slightly too straight. One of the security men had murmured it into a phone in the lobby, and the woman who arrived 20 minutes after Stellan, his date, apparently, dark-haired and expensively put together, the kind of beauty that was maintained with significant effort and resources, had said his name when she sat down with the particular inflection of someone who uses a person's name as a way of establishing ownership. Her name was Vienne. Mira brought the evening's amuse-bouche and poured the first glass of water and withdrew, she observed, as she always did, from the edges of her peripheral vision, while appearing to be occupied with other tables. She had developed this skill over 4 years, the ability to watch without seeming to watch, to absorb a full picture from fragments and angles. What she saw was this. Stellan Vard spoke very little. Vienne spoke a great deal. He listened in the manner of someone who had perfected the art of appearing present while actually processing something else entirely. When Vienne reached for his hand across the table, he did not pull away, but his hand did not respond either. It simply remained where it was, a fixed object, while she animated around it. And then she excused herself to use the restroom. Mira was refilling the water glasses at the adjacent table when she registered the change. Vienne had taken her phone with her when she left. That was normal. What was not normal was the man who materialized from the direction of the bar approximately 90 seconds after Vienne disappeared. Not a guest, not staff, someone in between, someone who had the practiced neutrality of a person paid to look unremarkable. He stood near the corridor that led toward the private dining rooms for perhaps 45 seconds, and then he was gone. And then Mira understood what she had seen. She replayed it in the filing system of her mind. The angle of the man's sightline when he stood in the corridor, the way his gaze had moved across the room and settled, briefly but precisely, on the 2 security men at the nearby table. The communication she had not heard but had seen. 2 people who did not know each other acknowledging something wordlessly. She thought about the notation in the reservation book. Maximum privacy. The kind of privacy that required clearing with management. The kind of privacy that meant someone powerful was worried about something. She thought about the security men and the way one of them had leaned slightly forward in the past few minutes, not toward Stellan, but toward the door. And she thought about Vienne, who had left the table at a moment that had not been random. Mira went to the service station. She picked up a pen and a notepad, the small ones they used for orders, unremarkable, part of the scenery. Her hand was steady. She had always had steady hands. She had always steady hands. She wrote 4 words. Then she walked back to table 14, and she set down the small plate of bread that she had picked up from the pass, and she placed the folded note beneath the rim of his side plate, and she said in the quiet, neutral tone she used for everything, "Compliments of the kitchen, Mr. Vard." She walked away without looking back. What happened in the next 4 minutes, Mira did not see directly. She heard a certain quality of movement from the direction of table 14. Controlled, deliberate. She heard one of the security men speak quietly into his earpiece. She heard the maitre did receive some kind of instruction and move quickly toward the service exit with an expression he was working hard to keep neutral. She kept doing her job. She brought the first course to a couple celebrating what appeared to be their 25th anniversary. She opened a bottle of Burgundy for a table of 4 who were deep in a conversation about a development project in Etobicoke. She checked on a solo diner near the window who always ordered the same thing and never wanted to be disturbed. She did not look at table 14. When Vienne returned from the restroom, she was intercepted in the corridor, by whom Mira could not see from her position, but she heard the particular quality of silence that follows a confrontation in a public space, the kind where all the noise is suppressed and the air goes tight. And then she heard the restrained sound of Vienne being escorted somewhere, her voice controlled but brittle, the voice of someone maintaining composure because the alternative was worse. Then, Stellan Vard was standing beside her. She had not heard him approach. She had been adding a note to a check, standing at the service station with her back to the room, and then he was simply there. The way very dangerous things sometimes simply appear when you are not watching for them. He was close enough that she was aware of the specific quality of his presence, the stillness at its center that somehow made the surrounding air feel more charged rather than calmer. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a question. It was the kind of statement that operated as a request only as a courtesy to both parties. Mira set down her pen. "I'm working," she said. "I know." A pause. "Walk with me anyway." The maitre d' had materialized at the edge of her vision and was gesturing that it was fine, that it was more than fine, that she should please go with this man immediately. She went. He led her to the private alcove off the main dining room, a small space used for wine tastings and quiet business conversations, and he stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and looked out at the lights of the city for a moment before he turned around. "The note said your date is not who you think she is. They're already in the building." He said it without inflection, like a man reading back a legal document. "How did you know?" "I saw a man at the bar make eye contact with your security team," Mira said. "Except he wasn't looking at your security team the way someone does when they recognize a face. He was looking at them the way someone does when they've been told where they'll be. And your date left the table 90 seconds later. The timing wasn't a coincidence." Stellan Vard studied her for a long moment. He had very dark eyes, not warm, but not cold in the way of someone who feels nothing, cold in the way of someone who has learned to keep their temperature tightly regulated because the consequences of losing it are too expensive. "You've seen things like this before," he said. "I've seen things," Mira said. "This room, the people who come here, I pay attention." Why? She considered lying. It would have been easy. She could have said habit or instinct or any number of things that sounded reasonable and gave away nothing. Instead, she said, "Because nobody notices me noticing, so it costs me nothing and I learn a great deal." Something in his expression shifted, barely perceptible, like a single variable changing in a long equation. "You're an accountant," he said. It was not a question. He said it with the certainty of someone who had already had her looked up. "I have a degree in accounting," she said. "I pour wine for a living." "Why?" Because accounting firms wanted someone who looked different. He held her gaze. "Their loss," he said, and it was said without sentiment, as a straightforward assessment of fact. Mira looked at him. "What happened to Vienne?" "She's being held somewhere she can't make any calls." He said it in the same tone someone might use to discuss a scheduling conflict. "She'll be fine. Eventually." Why did she do it? He was quiet for a moment. Not avoiding the question, processing it. Her brother owed a considerable amount of money to people I have a complicated history with. She was offered a simple transaction, his debt, in exchange for information about my location tonight and confirmation that I would be distracted. He paused. "She took the deal." "Did you know?" Mira asked. "That she was capable of it. I suspected she was unhappy," he said. "I did not suspect she was negotiating with the Marchetti people." The word Marchetti landed in the air with a particular weight, a name that meant something specific to people who knew what it meant. Mira filed it. "That's not the same thing," she said. "Being unhappy and being a liability." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He tilted his head slightly. "You have a very precise way of speaking." "I have a precise way of thinking," she said. "The speaking follows." He was quiet for another moment, and she had the distinct and unusual experience of being looked at. Actually looked at, not the way the partners at the equity firm looked through her. Not the way the Wednesday regulars looked past her, but the way someone looks when they are genuinely trying to understand what they are seeing. It was uncomfortable in the way that things are uncomfortable when they are unfamiliar. "I'd like you to come work for me," he said. She blinked. "Doing what?" "Accounting," he said, "and paying attention." Myra looked at the city lights through the window. The lake was dark beyond the grid of them. She thought about the loan she was still paying off. The studio apartment in a neighborhood that was being gentrified around her faster than she could keep pace with. The interview she'd had 6 months ago at a firm in the financial district, where the interviewer had asked her twice whether she was sure she had the right room. She thought about the 4 words she had written on a notepad tonight and the way they had moved through this man's world like a stone dropped in water, the rings spreading outward to touch everything. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Of course," said Stellenvard. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a card. Matte black. A phone number in silver. "Nothing else. Take the time you need." She took the card. She went back to work. She poured wine and cleared plates and brought the 3rd course to the anniversary couple, who were holding hands across the table now, and she smiled at them with genuine warmth, because 25 years of choosing someone was a remarkable thing, and she respected it. She thought about the card in her pocket. She thought about Vienne, who had made a different kind of calculation, who had looked at the man she was with and seen not a person but a resource, a position, a piece to be moved across a board. She thought about what it cost, doing that, what you had to hollow out in yourself to get to the place where you could. She thought about what Stellenvard had said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. Their loss. It occurred to her, somewhere between the dessert course and the last of the evening's reservations clearing out, that she had spent 4 years making herself invisible and had been seen anyway, by the one person in the room who was trained to notice everything and chose what to act on. There was something in that worth considering. She called the number on the card. 3 days later, he answered on the 2nd ring. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them," he said. She had prepared a list. Salary benchmark to the actual market rate for a forensic accountant in Toronto. She had looked it up, and it was more than twice what she was making. A formal contract, reviewed by a lawyer of her own choosing. No involvement in anything she was not explicitly briefed on and given the opportunity to decline. And one more thing. "I won't be invisible," she said. "If I work for you, I'm an accountant. I'm on salary. I'm in the building. I have a title and a role. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a spy. I just happened to notice things. A pause on the other end of the line. Agreed, he said. Just like that? You're not negotiating for something unreasonable, he said. You're negotiating for exactly what you're worth. Another pause, slightly different in texture. I don't hire people who undervalue themselves. She moved into the Vard Group's offices in the Exchange Tower 6 weeks later. Her business card said Senior Financial Analyst, and the office she was given had a window. It was a small window, but it was a window. The work was unlike anything she had done before, and she was good at it in a way she had never quite been permitted to be good at anything. Stellan, Vard's operation was large and layered and threaded through legitimate business interests, like a river running through limestone. You could see the surface, but the actual structure was underground, and understanding it required exactly the kind of mind that could hold multiple simultaneous systems and track the relationships between them without losing the thread. Mira's mind was exactly that kind. She also, as had been implied, continued to notice things. She noticed the vendor relationship that had numbers, that didn't move the way vendor relationships' numbers should move, and she flagged it quietly to Stellan, and 3 weeks later that vendor was no longer in the picture. She noticed a pattern in the timing of certain cash movements that suggested someone in the organization was creating float they shouldn't have had access to, and she tracked it back to its source with the same methodical patience she had applied to 4 years of watching people in a dining room. She noticed the way certain members of Stellan's inner circle spoke to her when he was present versus when he was not, and she catalogued that too, not for personal reasons, but because the delta between those two states was always information. She and Stellan developed a rhythm. He was not easy to work for. He was exacting and impatient with imprecision, and had very little tolerance for anything that could have been done correctly the first time, but wasn't. He held himself to the same standard, which made it easier to accept. But it was still not easy. He had the quality of someone who had grown accustomed to operating at an intensity that wore most people out, and he seemed genuinely unaware of this, the way people are unaware of things that have been true for so long they've become invisible. He was also, underneath all of that, something she had not expected. He noticed things too, not the same things, not in the same way. He was strategic where she was analytical, interested in leverage where she was interested in patterns. But he saw that she worked through lunch, and he started having something brought to her desk without being asked. He saw that the overhead lights in her office were the wrong temperature for the work she was doing, and he had them changed. He saw that there was a running joke among a small subset of the support staff that excluded her, and he did something about it quietly, in the way he did most things, without announcing it, without making her aware he had noticed. The problem simply resolved. She was aware he had noticed. She noticed everything. The first time he touched her was not romantic. It was practical. She had been reviewing a document at the conference table, and he had leaned over her shoulder to point to a figure, and his hand had settled briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of ordinary professional proximity, and then he had caught himself and stepped back, and the correction in his movement was more interesting to her than the touch itself. Because Stellan Vard did not make unconscious gestures. He was not a man who operated on autopilot. If his hand had gone to her shoulder, it had gone there because some part of him had made the decision before another part of him had reviewed and countermanded it. She filed that too. The Marchetti situation came to a head in November, 4 months after she joined the organization. She had been following the numbers for weeks, a slow bleed in one of the subsidiary accounts, small enough to miss if you weren't looking, too regular to be accidental. Someone was skimming, and the pattern, when she finally traced it far enough back, led somewhere she had not expected. She brought it to Stellan on a Thursday evening, when most of the office had cleared out, and the building was quiet. She laid the analysis on his desk in a neat stack. The source documents, the reconciliation she had built, the timeline, the projected total. She stood back and let him read. He read without speaking for 11 minutes. She had been on time. When he looked up, his expression was not what she expected. She had expected something cold, something controlled. What she saw was more complicated, something that looked almost like tiredness, which on a man like Stellan Vard was a more significant tell than anger would have been. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. "Not by name," she said. "By account number, yes. I didn't want to know the name until I could hand you something solid." He turned the page to the final figure. The amount taken over the preceding 8 months was significant. "This is Marcus Leal," he said. "He's been with the organization for 11 years. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Don't be." He set the pages down, carefully. "You did exactly what you're here to do." He looked at her, Mira. It was the first time he had used only her first name. Up until that point, it had been Ms. Delacroix in professional settings and Delacroix in shorthand. The shift was small, and she heard it like a struck bell. "Yes," she said. "You could have brought this to other people," he said. "Anyone in legal, anyone in operations. You brought it to me directly." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She considered, as she had considered before, the easier answer. And she set it aside again for the true one. "Because if there's a leak in an organization," she said, "you bring it to the person you trust most, not the person with the most relevant title. I didn't know who I could trust. I knew I could trust you." He was quiet for a long time. "How did you know that?" he asked. She thought about the way he handled things. The vendor, the lighting, the joke that had resolved without drama, the card with his phone number on it, offered without pressure, and the phone call answered on the second ring. "You do what you say you'll do," she said, "and you see what's actually in front of you, not what you want to see, not what's convenient to see." She paused. "That's rare." He stood up from his desk. He was a large man, and the movement shifted the geometry of the room. He walked to the window. The office had a real window, floor to ceiling, the kind her office did not. And he looked out at the city the same way he had looked out at it from the restaurant, all those months ago, and she had the strange sensation of a circle completing. "The night at Alouette," he said. "You could have said nothing." Yes, most people would have. Most people were too busy pretending not to see what was happening to actually do something about it, she said. "But not you. I've spent a long time being underestimated," she said. "I know what it looks like when someone thinks you're not there. I don't do it to other people." He turned from the window. There was something in his expression that was open in a way she had not seen from him before. Not vulnerable, that was not the right word. Not for a man like this. But present, fully present, in a way that cost him something, and he was paying it deliberately. "I see you," he said. "For what it's worth, I have, since that night." Mira Delacroix had spent 29 years being very careful about what she let herself want, because wanting things that weren't available to you was a particular kind of pain she had learned to avoid. She had built her life around being practical and precise and unsentimental about the distance between what was and what she wished were true, but she was also, underneath all of that, very good at reading what was actually in front of her. Not what was convenient, not what was easier to believe, what was actually there. "I know," she said quietly. "I noticed." The Marcus Leal situation was resolved in the way these situations were resolved in Stellan Vard's world. Efficiently, without public drama, and with consequences that Marcus would have significant time to reflect on. The subsidiary account was restructured. The vulnerability that had allowed it to happen was addressed. Mira rebuilt the reporting system from the foundation, something she had been quietly wanting to do since she arrived, and the new architecture was cleaner and more resilient and significantly harder to manipulate. She was promoted in January. The new title was Director of Financial Integrity, which was both accurate and, she thought, rather elegant in its ambiguity. Stellan announced it in the Monday morning meeting with 6 words. "Delacroix is now running the numbers." Nobody asked follow-up questions. She moved to a larger office. It had a better window. On the first Friday of February, Stellan appeared in the doorway of her office at 6:15 with his jacket over his arm and said, "There's a restaurant downtown that does a tasting menu I've been meaning to try for 3 years. I keep getting interrupted. Are you available Saturday evening?" She looked up from her monitor. "The kind of dinner I might need to pass you another note?" she asked. The corner of his mouth moved. It was, she had learned, the closest he came to a smile in most circumstances. "I was thinking the kind of dinner where no one has to write anything down," he said, for once. Mira Delacroix, who had spent 4 years invisible in a room full of powerful people, who had learned to move like water through stone and catalogue the world from its margins, who had written 4 words on a notepad in a 5-star restaurant and dropped them into the machinery of a man's world like a key into a lock. She closed her laptop, and she said yes. The woman who had once made an art of disappearing had no intention of doing so ever again.